Hi, today I'm going to be talking about the cerebral hemispheres. So I'm bringing back out our brain model, and I'm going to move it so that you guys actually see it. We're looking at the front, and now we're looking at the back. There we go with it all together. And that kind of light tan stuff on the top, that's the cerebral hemispheres. So I'm going to remove the stuff that we're not doing today. This is the cerebellum. We'll talk about that later. And then this is the brainstem. I have to take it apart to be able to get it out. There we go. And then this part that's left is one half of the cerebral hemispheres. And then this is like the brainstem and the diencephalon that would have sat inside of it. So we're focusing on this today, and it has three main structures. Let's see. Is it enough to be able to see on there? Oh, there's one where you can see it. All right. So do you see like the most superficial layer right there? That's called the cerebral cortex. And then everything else inside of that is called like the white matter. So the cerebral cortex is like our conscious mind. It's where all of our thinking happens in that teeny tiny, like millimeters thick area on the edge. And then everything else is really just for communication. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say about this. Just remember that the brain, everything is paired. So it's like there's two lobes, one on each side of the body. Oh yeah, and this is the region that everybody thinks of like when you think of the brain, and this is like the cap on the mushroom, and it has a wrinkly appearance, so it's folded to be able to have more surface area, and your brain is supposed to be roughly the size of like two of your fists put together, which like seems kind of small. And when I look at this, what I notice is all the wrinkles and all the folds, which is an adaptation for surface area. So let's take a closer look at those. The top, like bumpy part of the brain, like when you look at this and you see all of the ridges, each individual ridge is called a gyrus. Like that right there is a gyrus. That right there is a gyrus. That right there is a gyrus. And all the ridges put together are gyri, or plural. So ridges, gyri. And then the like grooves that go a little bit deeper that actually like cause the gyrus to form are called sulcus. I'll move the pointer away so that you can see the word. And then if the sulcus goes like especially deep, it's called a fissure, which we can remember from like geology. And the fissures and the sulci separate the cerebral hemispheres into different lobes. And the lobes you're probably going to be familiar with because they're named after the skull bone that they're located near. So this was our frontal bone, frontal lobe. The top of the head, parietal, and again, like left and right parietal lobes. The back of the head, occipital, and the side of the head, like where your ear is the temporal bone. This down here would be your cerebellum and your brainstem. We're just not focused on them today. There is a fifth cerebral lobe, but it's buried. So like this image is showing us like moving away the outer lobes and revealing the insula or the insular lobe. And this one is also paired. So little island inside of the brain. This is so in real life, the brain parts are not color coded. So can you imagine that you have a cadaver brain and you're trying to figure out like which part is which? You're going to navigate by looking for where the fissures and the sulci are because they always form in the same spot. So like the dotted lines aren't there either, but the dotted lines are like emphasizing where a fissure is for us so that we can tell the lobes apart. So again, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, and we'd have to remove all three of these lobes to be able to see the insula. And then there's the cerebellum that has a different appearance, doesn't have the wrinkles, the gyri. I mentioned this at the beginning when I was trying to show you the brain, is that it has three different parts. The outside is the cerebral cortex. So in this picture, like, do you see how it looks like somebody took kind of like a light brown marker and like traced the whole thing? That is the cerebral cortex. It's kind of nicknamed like the executive suite because it makes all of our executive decisions, like thinking, remembering, making logical decisions, noticing that we have to go to the bathroom, feeling hot or cold. Just like anything that involves thinking about it is in that little superficial layer. And then everything else that is inside of it is called the white matter. So, like all of this stuff right here is white matter, and it facilitates communication between like one side of the cortex and the other side of the cortex, and it also lets the cerebral hemispheres communicate with the rest of the central nervous system, like the brainstem and the cerebellum. And then in the very middle here, we have structures called the basal nuclei, and they're buried kind of where the insula would be. And because of that, we really don't know what they do, and anatomists don't even agree on like which parts are considered basal nuclei. Um, they might function with movement and stuff like that, but there's also like the cerebellum that controls movement, so it's been hard to distinguish like exactly what the basal nuclei do. So for the rest of this class, we're going to focus solely on the cerebral cortex and get into the functions of that part a little bit deeper. Just remember, it's only that superficial layer that does all this. You probably know this, but each hemisphere is concerned with the contralateral side of the body. So that means that like the right hemisphere of my brain controls the left side of my body. Um, both hemispheres do everything, and like both hemispheres for the most part like work together and they can do both jobs, but we oftentimes do have one hemisphere like that gets better at it than the other one. So one of them kind of like is the leader. That's called lateralization. Like lateral, like sideways, means favoring like your right or your left cerebrum. This is called cerebral dominance. So normally people have one cerebral that's dominant, and 90% of people have left-sided dominance. Oh, and by the way, cerebral dominance means like dominant for language and math. So 90% of people have their left-sided being dominant, which means they primarily use this side when they're speaking or counting or solving logic problems. And then it also means that they're right-handed. And then we have that 10% of left-handed people who the right brain is dominant for them, and they tend to be like more artistic and poetic and things like that. So that's not a myth. And for functions of the cortex, we're going to split it into three different areas. Unfortunately, the lobes don't have specific functions. So normally, like we can split it up like structure, function. But no, this time we have to study all the structures, and then the functions are like overlapping in the different lobes. So one functional area is called the motor area. It controls all voluntary movement, and this is located only in the frontal lobe. We have sensory areas that make us aware of like how we're feeling, like pressure, touch, heat, things like that. And then and this one is spread out through all of the lobes except for the frontal lobe. And then we have the association areas that basically help the motor and the sensory areas to communicate and respond to each other. And that one is found in all lobes. Don't freak out, but this is the specific functions of those regions. So, like everything over here on the left side is a motor area, and like see, that's most of that is the frontal lobe. And then everything listed over here is either a sensory area or an association area. And down here at the bottom with those words and those like little colored squares, I'm waiting for that thing to go away so that we can see. There we go. Like red is the primary motor cortex. Blue is the primary sensory cortex. Light blue is the sensory association cortex. We are not going to memorize all of these structures, but if there's something specific that you're looking for, like, oh, I wonder where my vision is, I wonder where my taste is, you'd be able to find it here. Or here is a sliced in half view with some other structures that weren't visible on the outside. We're going to do an activity where you take a closer look at some of these specific functions, so hopefully you can orient them within this presentation. Thanks.